Happy Student Appreciation Day Eve to all who celebrate. I know I do. I know Birm does.
Yeah, sure. I celebrate all of the days.
Well, it makes this one of the best Fridays of the year. Welcome to The Beat, presented by the Waterworks. He, of course, is Birm. I am Austin. And we get to watch a full practice on Saturday. I'm pumped. I'm going to put out the milk and cookies for Student Appreciation Day Santa. We're going to paint some eggs for the Easter
Student Appreciation Day Easter
Bunny. Yep. They're all... The leprechaun already came. He brought us spring football.
Yeah.
It's all happening at once.
It's funny how all of these days just run together and truly become an amalgamation of just everything we've always feared and loved.
Feared?
There will be roosters, chips there.
Yeah.
There will be roosters.
Well, if Jay-Z doesn't steal them all.
There will be students. There will be football players. There will be a lot of recruits. It is going to be one heck of a Saturday on campus at Ohio State. And then, it's Easter weekend. The players will break up after whenever Jeremiah Smith gets done with all of the students who are taking his time up, which I'm sure there will be many.
I don't know. Last year, C.J. Barnett and his SWAT team ushered Jeremiah out of there after like 2 minutes.
Yeah, but Ohio State had just come off a national championship win. I think that the program is probably excited to have a little bit of more hands-on from the crowd and from the fans.
Because don't put hands on Jeremiah.
Well, America, don't touch the players on Saturday. If you happen to be inside of the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, don't touch the players or the coaches or anybody else.
Just Birm.
Just Austin, if he asked for it. But I do think that there's probably
a handshake is fine.
Yeah. If there's 50 new players, I think that there's a lot of guys who haven't really had their first taste of the Ohio State fan experience yet. Right. And I think that they will actually really appreciate that opportunity and be glad to have it. For all the guys who come from Alabama, the guys who come from Florida State, the guys who come from high school football that have never really been able to experience this, it's a nice precursor to the spring game in 2 weeks for those guys to get a sense of what Ohio State football really means on campus when people are able to express it.
Yeah, so Student Appreciation Day is going to be great. Very much looking forward to that. We'll have the Coaches Clinic in 2 weeks from today, which is Friday, a Freaky Friday. We've got your mailbag questions. Appreciate you sending those in to the Austin Birm Show at gmail.com. We'll get into those. And then we have the actual spring game. So 3 chances to watch the Buckeyes in the next 2 weeks, which will be very informative. And I can't wait to hear that. First question this week, Birm, came from Claire. And she leaned fully in to a typical Freaky Friday tradition. If you had to boldly predict, in all caps, who is going to wear the Block O jersey this year?
First and foremost, Claire, appreciate the email. Second, please send a follow-up email and let us know if everyone calls you Claire Bear, because I think that's an important thing. As someone who, growing up, a lot of people called me Jer Bear, I would like to know how many other people have used that sort of nickname. So Claire Bear sounds like a good one. And I know we spent so much time last summer talking to Sonny Styles when he was the obvious choice to be the Block O. And we asked him at Big Ten Media Days in Las Vegas, if it's not you, who is it? Mm-hmm. And he said, Kenyatta Jackson, and surprised the heck out of us. I'm just going to...
What's that accent?
I don't know, the heck out of us. I think to
so
me...
hard.
I feel like there are 2 guys that are on the offensive side of the ball that need to be talked about. The first one is Brandon Inniss, who more and more I get the feeling like he's going to be a very important piece of this puzzle for Ohio State, just as a leader, but also on the field. And then the other guy is Austin Sareveld. And I know that that's one that you've mentioned in the past as a potential Block O wearer. I think there's other guys on the offensive line that could be in that conversation as well, but I'm going to boldly predict that it's going to be Brandon Inniss, and that is a departure from what I would have thought a few months ago, but I just there's something about the way he carried himself when we had the opportunity to talk with him a week and a half ago after practice, hearing the passion in his voice about being an Iron Buckeye, what it took to get there, what it meant for him to earn that. A guy who was a captain already, to me, Brandon Inniss is the right choice. He's a leader. He's a captain. Doesn't have to be from Ohio to wear the Block O. And I know that a lot of Ohio State fans might think that that's something that should be weighted into the conversation. And
difference maker.
And I don't disagree. But I think when there is such a stark difference between the leadership characteristics of one person to the rest of the team, I lean in that direction. I'm going to go with Brandon Inniss.
Yeah, I mean, you have two returning captains. They are both on offense with Austin Searveld and Brandon Ennis. I don't think that I would go so far as to boldly predict that Austin Searveld will take the Blocko. He certainly won't campaign for himself. He wouldn't be asking for that, which is also a pretty good, trait to have if you're going to be a Blocko recipient, is that you're not asking for it.
Sure. That sort of defeats the purpose.
Yeah. So, I think Brandon Ennis has married the idea of wanting to be the best leader possible and then chasing down the accolades that come with that. Not that it's a selfish thing, but when he talked about wanting to be an Iron Buckeye and that meant sacrificing a trip on the cruise for cancer, the Buckeye cruise for cancer, that sent off, I think, the warning lights, the red alarm that Brandon Ennis was doing everything he could to put himself in position, not just to resume his captaincy, but to potentially be that Blocko winner. I think if you had asked me the day after, let's say New Year's Day, after the loss in the Cotton Bowl, who is it going to be? I said if Kenyatta Jackson comes back, he's probably going to put that on. There's really only a case in my mind for 5 potential players that could have it. I think that Brandon Ennis, Austin Searveld, Kenyatta Jackson, Jermaine Matthews, and then it's like kind of a grab bag of 5 in there, but probably Carson Hinsman would be the other one that I included.
I would not include Carson Hinsman and include Luke Montgomery instead, who I think...
Yeah, but he's got the extra year. That's the tiebreaker for me.
He does, but they came in at the same time. Luke came in with Austin Searveld. It's not like he has a year left because he redshirted, but so does Austin if he wanted it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he came in the 23 class with Luke and Josh. So I think Luke is that kind of personality that people are drawn to, the guy that is willing to stand up and be the face of the program even when things are going poorly. If they have a good day or a bad day, Luke's that type of guy. Again, I think it's going to be Brandon Ennis, and I'm certainly not campaigning for anybody, but my belief is that his commitment to the program for being a guy that is not in a defined starting role, the impassioned way he pursued the Iron Buckeye.
Yeah.
And I think that's because he was smart enough to understand that there are a ton of wide receivers walking into the program for the first time, and he saw Tom Parker and Devin McEwen and said, hey, I can't take these days off. Cows don't take days off, and neither does Brandon Ennis at this point. And so
he's played with Cade Stover.
I think that he's the guy. So we'll find out, I guess, in a few months. But I'm interested to see who else really puts himself into that conversation more than anything else. Because as you said, in a team of so many new players, there's only a handful of guys that can even really be in this conversation right now, especially if we presume it's only seniors.
Yeah, no, and it might be troublesome if we're agreeing on the same bold prediction. That doesn't usually happen that frequently.
No. But hey, that's just the continuity of the program, and everything is so easy to predict.
Yeah, exactly. Just like this, which comes from Eric. I've heard you guys mention versatility in several position groups. At what point is it a detriment to be versatile versus being a specialist? In 2025, the schedule broke in a way that Ohio State played versatile guys and ran the table against lesser opponents. But when the talent of Miami and Indiana came calling, Ohio State was limited in how effective it could be. I think it's an interesting question. I don't think that positional versatility and moving guys around was the reason that Ohio State lost those postseason games personally. So I guess that's where I start. I understand that Eric's question is forward-looking, I think, more than there is a reference to the end of the 2025 season, so I recognize that, but when we've talked about this with putting guys in different positions and what that might mean, I don't think that moving Austin Searveld from guard to tackle was the reason that Ohio State lost those games. Just for example, because I know I edited down the question. There was a reference to that in the email that we got. I don't really think that Ohio State was toying with things that costed in those games personally.
No, I actually kind of disagree wholeheartedly with the premise of the question in general, because I don't think that if you were to look at the 2025 Ohio State Buckeyes, that versatility would be one of the things that stand out as far as like what separated them from the pack through the regular season. I don't, in fact, I think they were less versatile than they should have been at 2025. I thought that they used less depth than they should have used in 2025, especially on offense when it came to what they were doing with the wide receivers in the rotation, especially when Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith got dinged up. I don't think that they did as much as they should have done inside of the red zone with the running backs. I don't think that they did enough versatile things with the group of tight ends that they had. I think that they were fairly predictable in a lot of those cases. I don't think that defensively there was a lot of flexibility. It was the same 11 pretty much all the time. Now, sure, you would change what you were doing with Arvell Reese one game or change what you did with Caleb Downs the next, but that's because those players had skill sets that allowed them to do a lot of things, and it was positionally and matchup based, not necessarily like let's do this to confuse people or let's do this to get more hands on the football. Obviously the offensive line, there was an attempt to move things around when Tiger Shabola's play was inconsistent, but that wasn't about guys' versatility. That was like who can play the right guard without it looking like an absolute nightmare out there at times. So I actually think that one of the problems for the 2025 Buckeyes was their lack of versatility. And I think if you go to the Indiana and Miami games, that was on display because they were predictable early enough in the game that those teams were able to get a beat on what they were doing and found ways to consistently upset Ohio State's plans because the Buckeyes didn't have a response. Yeah. So I guess I'll just say I don't agree with the premise of the question in general. I appreciate the question, but I don't think I agree that was a problem last year. But it is certainly a talking point this offseason, and I think it's a talking point this offseason because that's what Ryan Day and the coaches are trying to find.
I think and I've mentioned this probably once a week, if not more. When you looked at what Ohio State was pursuing in the transfer portal and the class that it signed, it was veterans and it was versatility. Yeah. Like those two things kept coming up over and over, both inside the Woody and then just if you looked at the players that they brought in, someone like Earl Little who could play 3 or 4 different spots in the secondary, Christian Allegro who we're hearing the possibility of 3 or 4 different roles in the front 7. I mean, those are the players that they want, and I think
Quay Rasaw kind of positionless,
same deal, and even James Smith or Edric Houston with the ability to maybe play either spot on the interior or Edric to be able to kick out to the edge if you need to. I don't think he will at 305 pounds, but he could. Yeah. The same is true for some of these other defensive backs and Cam Calhoun. I think I don't know that there was as much. I anticipated Ohio State playing with more depth than it did in 2025 because it had more versatile athleticism, or what I thought that it did. But when you look at the wide receivers, and you referenced pretty much that starting 11, with 1 or 2 exceptions on defense, that they did not play with as much depth, and I don't know that we saw that versatility. I would say my argument would be during the regular season, Ohio State, when it was managing the tempo, when it was relying on that defense, it was playing very, I think, vanilla football on both sides of the football because it just knew it had superior athletes. My criticism leaving Lucas Oil Stadium and feeling the same way in a lot of respects at AT&T Stadium was that what didn't happen was pushing the gas pedal, where we probably would have seen more creativity and versatility from that roster. I know that that's how I felt then. I don't feel differently now. That's what I believe cost them those 2 losses. We didn't actually see the versatility.
Right. I think that's 100% correct. I also think it's interesting that it's TUVW, but like not double V, considering the W is 2 V's. It's not 2 U's unless you write it very sloppily.
Okay.
I don't know. You're just talking about versatility and veterans, and I'm like, why do we call it a double U instead of a double V? When clearly, when you're learning how to write the alphabet in school, it's 2 V's that you write.
Yeah. Fascinating. I mean, times change.
I think sometimes you just have to be willing to take a look at the way you've done things.
And change it. Well, it's a great point because seasons change. Your approach changed. Comfort does not, Birm. Call the Waterworks and Hetter Heating Cooling Hetter Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing for maintenance, installation, and repairs, or visit online at thewaterworks.com. The Waterworks and Hetter Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing are proud sponsors of Ohio State Athletics. That's not the only thing that might change.
No, sometimes your body changes.
Yeah.
I weighed myself on Thursday morning before I'd made the trek down to Columbus for Thursday's activities. I was 195.6 pounds, crushing it.
Yeah.
Still lower than I was when I entered maintenance mode with Awaken 180 8 weeks ago. I'm down 40 total pounds since I started the program. And I started that program, just to be clear, the week of Thanksgiving for a reason. I started then because I knew if I was going to commit to it, I needed to be putting myself outside of my comfort zone. And I went into the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas,
Bowl season,
all of that stuff. And I lost 40 pounds in 8 weeks on Awaken 180. If you go to awaken180weightloss.com, get started now. By the end of April, I promise you will have lost at least half that. And it's easy. It's not fun. I'm not going to say it's fun because nothing's fun when you can't have cheese for 8 weeks. But once you get through it and you learn how to adjust what you're eating and why you eat and how you eat, and the plan that they give you works. So go to awaken180weightloss.com. You can lose 40 pounds in 8 weeks. I did. He did. We both did.
That's factually correct.
Yeah.
But thanks to Eric for that question. This came from Zach, and I admit when I read it, I was fascinated by this. It took me down a lot.
I never thought about it.
A lot of wormholes.
Yeah.
Okay, so Zach said, if I remember correctly, Mike Vrabel tried to hire Ryan Day to be the Titans' offensive coordinator. Fact check, true. Day decided to stay at Ohio State. Then Arthur Smith got the job, if my timeline is correct. Would love to hear you guys talk about that sliding door moment and where Ohio State football would be if Day took that job and everything else that led to Urban's exit held true. Who is Ohio State's coach now? Is Ryan Day an NFL head coach? Oh, I tell you, a brain bender. Never had considered that possibility. Now, when we think back to the timeline, correct me if I'm wrong, the first aggressive pursuit of Ryan Day came from Mississippi State.
After the 2017 season, Ryan's first season with Ohio State, he was offered a head coaching job in the SEC, turned that down in order to stay at Ohio State and stay as their offensive coordinator. I believe that was the same offseason that Mike Vrabel came calling, because by a year later, Ryan Day was already the head coach in waiting at Ohio State.
Arthur Smith became the offensive coordinator of the Titans in 2019, unless I'm mistaken.
I don't know that.
I double checked. Well, we'll
have to trust the Wikipedia on this, right?
Well, because I thought that both pursuits of Ryan Day, the real threats to pull him away, did happen after his first year as the quarterback's coach, but maybe that's not correct. Maybe it was Mississippi State the first year, and then Tennessee and the Titans still thought that they could lure him away, even though Ryan Day had essentially already been named the replacement for Urban Meyer. Either way, if we take the premise and play that forward, given that timeline, who would have been the coach to replace Urban Meyer and who would be the coach now? I would say, and this is probably not a surprise to anybody who watches the beat presented by the Waterworks with any regularity, at that time, the stock could not have been much higher. It got slightly higher the next year.
Yeah.
But Luke Fickell had left, proven that he knew how to run a program at the highest level. I believe that he would have been brought back to Columbus to get the real shot at the job that he did not have in 2011, or at least not a fair shake at it. And we now have the benefit of hindsight in some ways. I think it would have looked a lot different at Ohio State with the infrastructure and the resources and the knowledge and the recruiting background and everything else if he had returned to Columbus rather than take the Wisconsin job. I think that was on paper, you would say it feels like a good fit. Midwestern, Big Ten, Luke Fickell should be winning there. I think there are limitations at Wisconsin that would not have existed at Ohio State. And he proved, and this is not to judge or whatever what's happened for Luke Fickell at Wisconsin, because it's not worked. I can't hide from that fact.
But he was still at Cincinnati at that point.
He was
right?
at Cincinnati. He had just won. If we're talking about
went
going
to the
through
Sugar Bowl
2018,
that year, right?
That was after the 2019 season. They made the CFP. After 2018, they won 11 games. They did that back-to-back years. So that was not the playoff year for the Bearcats. But I think he would have certainly walked back up the interstate to take that job. That was not a time frame where Marcus Freeman would have been involved, where Brian Hartline would have been a candidate, where anybody else that would be a trendy name.
It was probably a two-person race, and that would have probably been Luke Fickell or Matt Campbell at the time, if I had to guess.
I think that's true.
Because Gene Smith clearly would have been making the decision to hire. I think he would have probably gone a pretty safe route, and someone that had Ohio ties, someone that had not been linked to any sort of off the field anything. You are hard pressed to find two guys who are, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, two guys who are more boring as a coach than Luke Fickell or Matt Campbell. Two guys who are not going to embarrass your program. Two guys who are going to go out and just do the job, who love Ohio, who are from Ohio. The question is, would Ryan Day still be an NFL head coach? And I mean, Arthur Smith's not. Yeah, Arthur Smith is not an NFL head coach at this point. So I don't know why Ryan Day would be. I think that you might have seen a similar trajectory.
I think maybe the question would be, would he have become an NFL head coach? And
his NFL career had not been exactly like lighting the world on fire to that point. He went back to college and went back to Ohio State after failed experiments with Chip Kelly in San Francisco and Philadelphia. That's an interesting question. I think that you could have probably seen a very similar path for Ryan Day as you've seen for Arthur Smith in the NFL. I mean, he would have been with the Titans. The Titans had Derrick Henry and some pretty talented players around him. They were one of the better teams in the league for those couple of years. I think he probably would have gotten a shot. The Titans hired Brian Callahan from the Bengals. I mean, like that's all you need to know, that they would have given anyone a shot after Vrabel left. So
yeah.
I don't think that Ryan would have stayed there. Would the Atlanta Falcons have given him a head coaching opportunity like they did Art Smith? I would say probably so.
Probably, yeah.
So would he still be an NFL coach? I don't know, because obviously we saw what happened to Arthur Smith's career, and the NFL stands for not for long.
I'm told that it stands for not for long.
That's
exactly what you're going to say.
That's what we've heard, America. I don't know. It's interesting. I would like to ask Ryan Day about that. In fact, I'm going to ask him about that on Saturday at Student Appreciation Day. I'm going to pull him aside and say, Ryan, can I ask you a question? So to speak. I don't know if I'm doing Ross Perot or Tim May, but
it sounded more like Ross Perot.
Well, we'll figure it out. They're both from Texas. Say, Ryan, hey, what's the deal? What's the deal with airplane food? What's the deal?
Because that's Seinfeld. I know that one.
That's not Tim May or Ross Perot?
No.
Shoot. I would just like to get Ryan Day's perspective on it, because it is an interesting butterfly effect, a little time weave there that, like, what would have gone.
Sliding doors was what Zach called it.
I never saw that one.
Oh, really?
I saw Butterfly Effect. Ashton Kutcher killed it in that movie.
He'd killed something.
The Mothman Prophecies, I think. No, that was Richard Gere.
Sliding Doors, a very fine movie. But
Rear Window.
Yeah, exactly right. Great question, Zach. Got us thinking.
No, that's interesting. It's an interesting question.
Pivotal moment. And also, like,
America, who would your choice have been at that time?
Well, remember, let's not go full revisionist history. There was also some level of conversation at that time about Kevin Wilson's experience and Greg Schiano's experience as a head coach, which is why the Ryan Day choice came largely as a surprise to everybody. And when you think, even now, you know how it worked out, it's like, it's pretty wild that all the decision makers got together and like, you know what? Already we can tell that this is the guy who can lead the program. He's going to win a national championship. He's going to be a head coach, because his experience had been so extremely limited.
Yeah.
And volatile. And a lot of the offensive success at that time, even though Ryan Day was playing a very active role in it, publicly would be assigned to Kevin Wilson. And it was the combination of those two that I think they played off of each other so very well. But then also Greg Schiano, we thought they would be the interim head coaches, potentially Larry Johnson being in that group as well. We saw during the COVID year that, he filled in and got a head coaching win there at Michigan State. But it was focused on those two coordinators and not the guy who came in as the quarterback's coach, who was basically completely unknown to me and you when he arrived from the 49ers. Yeah. So it's pretty bonkers that they made that choice, and it's maybe even more bonkers that it worked out the way it did.
I like to give credit where credit is due. Okay. I was told about 2.5 months after Ryan Day arrived on campus by a former Ohio State assistant coach that guy is going to be Ohio State's next head football coach. And I said, are you? No. And he's like, watch. And then when Urban Meyer was suspended for those first 3 games, and it ended up being Ryan Day a year later. That was the coach put in charge. I'm like, oh boy,
Yeah.
that person nailed it. I mean, I've told the story before. It's not the first time I've said that, but it's interesting because Ryan, coming from the NFL, coming from a very volatile coaching career, coaching tree, arc, to get that opportunity, he walked into the building and did exactly what he wants his players to do when they walk in from a new place, and he put his nose down and he did the work, and it's obviously paid out pretty well for him. He's making a lot of money, and now as the head coach at Ohio State, and the Buckeyes have won a lot of games, and so kudos to Urban Meyer and Gene Smith for trusting their instincts in that moment, because it certainly could have been different when he was picked to lead the team out of the tunnel those first 3 games of the 2018 season. I think that's when you're like, oh, this is real.
Yeah, and I was like, well, that's clearly where this is heading. It was a trial balloon, an audition that he passed. I mean, that whole month when you had the suspension, and it was weird to cover that training camp because of the very few media availabilities, and it was like, Ryan Day's going to do this in the middle of the month, and we're like, okay,
all right,
that's new.
Yeah,
let's see how he handles it, and he passed that test. But outside of that, if we were talking about even if we're saying now with hindsight, the 4th candidate is Ryan Day, the others were Greg Schiano, Kevin Wilson, and Luke Fickell, and like that was basically it. You say Matt Campbell, like that would give us a 5 to work with, but if you had to assign betting odds, like it was hard to imagine that Ryan Day would have been any higher than 5th on that list.
Do you think? Now we're just really getting down the rabbit hole. So
that's why I loved Zach's question.
This question is taking us there. Is there a guy around the country that you think Ohio State would have took a swing at? Like, and I'm going to throw the name Lincoln Riley out there as one because he was kind of the hot thing at that moment, and him and Ryan Day had been on a very similar trajectory once they were given the keys to their offenses in Oklahoma and Ohio State. And I wonder if there would have been a young, hot coach like that the Buckeyes could have taken a swing at, because you think about it, and again,
I mean, Matt Campbell was still relatively young then. I think he
was just getting to Iowa State, right? I mean, so
I think he probably fits the profile you're talking about.
Yeah, so maybe he's about the only one. And again, his Ohio ties maybe would have made him a better choice than Lincoln Riley. But I wonder if the way that the Lincoln Riley offense was at Oklahoma, the Heismans, the playoff appearances back-to-back years, if that would have been a guy, knowing that the agent world speaks the way they speak.
Well, Nick Saban worked at Ohio State.
That's true. Nick Saban would have been Ohio State's head coach if not for Ryan Day.
And now they're also friends. Like this world is so small.
Yeah.
Nick Saban and Ryan Day, friends.
BFF.
Arthur Smith and Ryan Day,
BFF.
Both in the mix for that Titans job at once upon a time. What a small world.
Thanks for the question. That was a lot of fun.
That was great. We've got one more. It is this week's Freaky Friday tradition.
Uh-oh.
Of a Julian Sayin question.
Okay.
Marty said, can you compare the leadership style of Julian Sayin to past Ohio State quarterbacks? The 2 quieter quarterbacks that come to mind are CJ Stroud and Kyle McCord. I'm curious what you see being much closer to practices and workouts. If Julian Sayin becomes the caliber of leader that CJ Stroud is, that is going to be a huge deal for the Ohio State offense. I don't consider CJ Stroud to be quiet. I think he was very vocal, very front-facing. When you heard him in pregame speeches, it was impactful. I don't know that I would make the same claim for Kyle McCord. He does fit into the quieter, more reserved leadership. It's not at this point, I think, breaking new ground to say that if you look at all 15 years that I've covered Ohio State now, I think there were more opportunities to wonder about Kyle McCord's ability to lead that team. And I certainly understand why he won that job. I was talking about him winning that job all along. I don't think that he's the reason that they lost to Michigan. I think he didn't play his best. But what was the strong suit of Kyle McCord? Not leadership. I don't think that that's the extraordinary trait that Ryan Day saw.
No, there was some of that when he got to campus early, when he was competing with CJ Stroud for the job in 2021. And I guess the difference is, I think Julian Sayin is quiet. I've certainly talked about my concerns about his leadership style in contrast to Will Howard specifically over the last few months a number of times. There's a difference between quiet and confident and quiet and nervous. And I sometimes got the feeling with Kyle that he was a little nervous to let his voice be heard as the guy telling and directing and leading. I don't get that sense out of Julian. Now, do I If I was the head coach at Ohio State, would I want my quarterback, the leader of my team, the leader of my offense, to be a bit more vociferous? Would I want him to be a touch more outgoing? Probably. Again, Will Howard changed the way that I view Ohio State quarterbacks moving into the future probably more than anybody in the last 15 years of covering this team. Will Howard and JT Barrett were like two of the best leaders I've ever seen. They did it in very different styles, but they were both very intense. They were both willing to yell and scream when they had to, but most of the time they just did it by going out there and working harder than everyone else and making sure that their teammates knew, I am not going to let you lose this game. And that is something we haven't really seen yet out of Julian, because the two games in 2025 where things got a little bit wonky, the Buckeyes lost. And so if I'm looking for a step from Julian as the leadership quality, it's not how much louder he is, it's how much more demonstrative he is in the huddle. It's how much more unwilling he is to accept defeat. And there are not a lot of ways we can really quantify that. I think the play against Miami in the Sugar Bowl or the Cotton Bowl, where, it's the play that's been talked about a lot, where he had an opportunity to pick up 7-8 yards with his legs and then get to the line of scrimmage and hurry things up towards the end of the half, and he threw it away instead. Those are the things that to me will indicate that there's been a change in his leadership style. I do not expect him to all of a sudden be Justin Fields or CJ Stroud as far as how comfortable he is getting in front of a room and talking to people. CJ is not quiet. CJ is extremely confident, and Julian's confident. He comes from the same basic neck of the woods, and that's kind of a California thing, but I do think that what you're going to see...
You don't want to be wishy-washy.
No, you don't want to be wishy-washy. And
that's what they say out there.
That's what they say, apparently.
That's what CJ taught us. CJ
was not wishy-washy. CJ said something, he meant it, and he would lead that way. Will did that. I think Julian's on his way there. I'm not... We will see practice on Saturday for the first time this spring, and so we will see if he is more assertive and more in your face. I'm going to tell you, the first two practices we saw, he was more vocal. He was more vocal. He was more grabbing guys and moving guys around and directing people. So I think there's a reason for Buckeyes fans to be optimistic about where it's going.
Let me throw this at you. Marty wants to know, because who would we compare it to? And if I have 15 years and you have 15 years of being around covering this team, the closest comparison in my mind for Julian Sayins's leadership style is Dwayne. I think if you're lining them all out there on that quarterback leadership spectrum, and you have most vocal and most passionate with Will Howard over here, and for the 15 years, if you have Braxton Miller and Kyle McCord on the quieter side, Dwayne is closer to the quieter side, the quiet confidence that you described. What separated Dwayne Haskins' leadership style from CJ Stroud, if they're both quiet, analytical, like football junkies? I don't know that Dwayne ever was fully comfortable with the spotlight, with being the public, poster boy for Ohio State football. He could do it. He did it very well, in my opinion. He got much better at it as that year went along as the starter. But I don't know that there were ever times that Dwayne was standing up in front of the team and pounding a fist, that's really when the wide receiver room took over as the leaders of the team, the culture guys, and you had Paris Campbell and Terry McLaurin and Johnny Dixon doing all that. Is it a perfect comparison? No, but I would say on that spectrum, Julian is going to land close to Dwayne.
Yeah, and there's one similarity now between Julian and CJ and Julian and Justin, and it's that he's now heading into year 2 as a starting quarterback under Ryan Day, and so we're going to probably see him elevate a little bit that way. Dwayne was a 1-year starter. He was a guy who went through a very intense competition to become the starter and had a remarkable year and got out of town, and we got to know him through the recruiting process, but he certainly was never really able to ingratiate himself to the fan base in a way that put him there and let them get to know him as a person.
Yeah.
And I guess if I have a concern about Julian Sayin, it's probably that at this point, because I think about the long-term legacy that a guy leaves. JT Barrett will come to Ohio State for the rest of his life, and people will love JT Barrett.
Yep.
Will Howard will do that, and he was only at Ohio State 1 year.
Still doing that. Already doing that.
But that is the difference. And so are you are you fully opening yourself up to Buckeyes fans and giving them a chance to know who you are? Because what I've found in my life as an Ohio State fan, but also in the last 15 years of being fortunate enough to cover this team, is that the players who go out of their way to like connect with the fans and make sure, the Jonathan Coopers of the world, guys like that people just will always view those guys slightly higher on the list of like, oh, favorite Buckeyes because of that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's not a lot of guys like Ezekiel Elliott who were just so good and so productive and happened to play at a national championship time and had like brandable things about him, like the crop top and all. Like Zeke's kind of in his own stratosphere when it comes to that stuff. But I think there is something about Julian that
I think he kind of shares it with Joey Bosa, to be honest.
Yeah, it's similar.
Yeah.
Joey was the same way, but they happened to be at a time with a national championship team. Like I think that they get a little bit.
But you think about that team and like Jeff Hireman. That's like, who's one of your favorite players to cover from that team?
Right. That's why people love guys like Cardale and Tyvis Powell and people who were around, maybe not quite as high level of players and didn't have the long-term careers, but what they did was really make sure that they ingratiated themselves to the fan base. And if I was Julian's agent, if I was Julian's legacy crafter, I'm not sure, if I was his perspective manipulator, I would.
What's that? That's the guy who.
That's a deep cut, folks. If you want to know,
slightly shorter than you, stands next to you.
His perspective
makes you look
manipulator
taller on the red carpet.
I would say, hey man, like you've got. Hopefully for you, another season at Ohio State. But the reality is the NFL draft class at quarterback next year is pretty deep. If Julian Sayin isn't ready to go, he could have 2 more years. He could be the uber rare 3-year starter at Ohio State at quarterback. So I would advise him to really lean into like letting people into the personality, because I know it's there. It's underneath there, but it is not always easy when you're at the Woody and there's 60 cameras and microphones in your face to just be comfortable. And so it takes a really special human to be comfortable with that.
There's going to be way more than 60 cameras in the Woody on Saturday. We will have one of them, though. There will also be fans, former Buckeyes, students. It's going to be awesome. It's not every year is the same, but it's definitely going to be a circus, and we will have snap judgments on Saturday afterwards. No one will talk after that practice except us, and we'll give you our thoughts of what we see from that scrimmage. But we've been waiting for it for the last couple of weeks, and it's going to be very exciting. So a little more weekend coverage coming your way as Ohio State spring camp rolls along. That will be practice number 8. Thanks for spending the rest of this week with us and capping it on a Freaky Friday with a mailbag. Thanks for all those questions. If you want to start getting them in for next week, that email is theaustinandbermshow@gmail.com. But otherwise, we will talk to you on Saturday at the Woody. He's Berm. I'm Austin. Have a great weekend.